Hi guys, this is Lauren with Lauren Watkins Art, and today I am giving myself a challenge. I am not allowing myself to use blending tools for this painting. So no rubber shapers, no soft tools, no fingers, nothing to blend out my pastels. And to make it even trickier, I'm using pastel pencils. The only thing I am allowing myself to do is to use rubbing alcohol to blend out my underpainting layer. And that's because I wanted to work on hot pink paper, and I am working in a sketchbook that only has tan sanded paper in it. So I had to make it hot pink somehow. Now I could have used watercolor or I could have used ink to tone this paper and make it hot pink to begin with before I started in with the pencils. So I could have really stuck with no blending tools whatsoever. But I was testing out these pastel pencils for a review, and I didn't think it was fair to use other supplies with these pastel pencils because at this stage in testing them out, I wanted to see what I could create with these pencils alone. So that's why I opted to use the rubbing alcohol technique instead. So I blended out the hot pink layer, and then I went in with dark blue and dark purple and a little bit of black to block in where I was going to put the deepest, darkest shadows of this painting. And then I am blending out those shadow areas with the rubbing alcohol. Now, if you are blending out your pastels with rubbing alcohol, just be careful what paintbrush you use. It can be a little hard on your paintbrushes. And then since I am working on a sanded paper, I'm working on Uart Sanded paper, I chose a really cheap paintbrush for this because sanded paper plus the rubbing alcohol, it's going to eat up and destroy those paintbrushes pretty quickly. So don't use anything nice for this stage of the painting. So this is the reference photo that I am loosely basing my painting off of. I just really like the feeling of atmosphere and light within this picture, and so I wanted to try and capture that in my own drawing, but I'm going to be taking my own creative liberties with it. So once my underpainting was completely dry and it no longer felt cool to the touch, I could go in with my pastel pencils and start working on the sky. For me, I find it's easier to work on the background of a painting first, so typically the sky if I'm doing a landscape, then work my way forward visually. So then I do the midground and then I do the foreground as I go along. I might go back and touch up the sky as I'm working, but I just find I don't have to fix mistakes as much if I start with the sky. So in my reference photo, you can see that the sky is lighter towards the bottom and it's brightest in the center. And then as you go out from that, it gets darker and darker. So I'm trying to mimic that in my piece. To create that effect, I focused my lightest values towards the bottom of the sky and towards the center. So it almost creates like a dome shape. And then as I worked my way out from there, I gradually darkened the values of the blues in the sky. And you can see I'm layering all different colors of blues. I even have some like greenish, turquoisey colors in the sky as well. And just because I am not using any physical tool to manually blend these pastels out, like a soft tool or a sponge or something along those lines, my pastels are still blending together because the pigments are sitting on the paper. And as I add a layer of pastel over the top of that, those pigments from the previous layer are mixing with the new pigments and creating a new color. But because I'm not using a manual blender, what happens is the tooth of the paper is allowed to shine through the picture. And so you can see little bits of pink showing through that sky, and that's because there isn't any pigment there. And that creates this fun, sparkly, kind of interesting effect with the pastel paintings, and it keeps it loose and a little bit more painterly, which I am trying to get a little bit better at. My control freak side wants to make everything smoothly blended and perfect, but then I lose the spontaneity and the fun of having little peaks of color or unexpected pigments showing through. So this was a great exercise into helping me loosen up, and it was also a great exercise in making me think about how I am laying down my pigment. Not just because I couldn't blend, but also because I was using a pastel pencil. Now, with traditional pastels, they're kind of like a brush where you can change how you're holding it and you get a different brush stroke, and it will look different as you apply it to your paper. So if I'm using a traditional pastel stick, I can hold it on its side and apply pigment in big swaths of color, or I can turn it up onto the corner and get more finer lines. But using a pastel pencil with no blending tools, I really had to think about how I was going to apply my color to get the effect I wanted. So traditionally in the sky, I would just go left to right and go back and forth and keep it very smooth that way. But to create kind of that halo effect that we see in the reference photo, I actually painted the sky in more of like a rainbow shape. And I had my brush strokes follow the shape of that glow. And then I had to pay attention to how I was applying the colors for the field, and when I was going to do more vertical strokes with my paintbrush and when I was going to keep it more horizontal, because I couldn't go in and fix those mistakes with my blending tools, and I am limited on how many layers of pastels I can do before the tooth of the paper gets filled up with pigment and I can't do any more layers. So I had to really pay attention to how I was applying my pastel pencils to this piece. Earlier I mentioned that I really loved the feeling of light in the reference photo, and so I'm trying to capture that in my painting, and I had to really pay attention to the colors I was choosing and where I was applying them in this piece to help give that feeling of light and that feeling of the sun rays kissing the tops of the field. And I did that by choosing my colors and using color theory. So where I wanted the sun rays to hit my piece, I didn't just go in with some light tans. I added warmer values. So I used more reds, more oranges. The browns I chose were more of a sienna brown where they had red undertones or more orange undertones in them. And then anywhere that was going to be more in shadow where the sun rays weren't hitting, I used cooler colors. I used more blues. The browns I chose had more blues and gray undertones instead of red. Even the gold colors I chose weren't as warm toned. And that play on warm and cool colors is really going to give that feeling of warmth and light within this piece, in addition to using correct values. You can really see it compared in the trees along the horizon line. In the center, they are a lighter value and they are more warm toned. There's more peaches and reds and oranges in that center. And then as you move out, they get darker in value. There's more blues and purples in them, except for the little top edges where a sun ray may be catching them. And even still, the little glow on those upper sections, on those outer trees and bushes, it's more red and dark orange instead of a lighter shade like the trees in the center. And if you think back to my underpainting, I started that process clear back then. I did a hot pink color to add warmth to the whole painting, and then I added my shadows and I used blues and purples and some blacks, cooler tone colors in general, to my shadow areas. And that helped build the foundation for the rest of this piece. Now, this is the stage of the painting where I was really, really itching to grab some of my blending tools, just to clean up some of the edges along the bottom of the painting. It would have made it easier to apply some details of like wheat stalk and some of those highlights. It would have been so much easier if I could have just grabbed my blending tools. They were sitting next to me from a previous painting, just taunting me at this stage of the painting. But I stayed strong and true to my word, and I did not use them. So I felt like my piece was far enough along that I could start adding some more details in. And true to form, I do bounce around. So I'm adding, the wheat stalks in, and then I see an area of the background that needs to be tweaked or adjusted. And so I jump back a little bit. But as I'm focusing on these more detailed grasses, so there's the ones that are more of like a little ball at the top, and then there's more of the cane-shaped ones. And as you can see, the ones that are on the edge, furthest away from the sun rays, those are darker in value. They tend to have more of a black tone to them. But then as I come more towards the center, I'm using more reds and dark browns to draw those details in. And that's just to help give that feeling of light and that glow of the sun rays hitting them. And this is where you can see some more of the creative liberties I took from my reference photo. So there's two things that you're going to see that I really did differently. One is the use of color. In the reference photo, apart from like the blue teals in the sky, the rest of the painting or the photo is like burnt umbers and blacks in the shadow areas, and then it's like yellow ochres and yellowy brown golden tones for the highlights. And for my piece, I wanted to play with color more. So there's a lot more reds and oranges and purples, and it's a lot more colorful and vibrant in chroma that way. The second thing I wanted to do was play with this idea of making my piece have like a vignette filter on it. In Photoshop, you can take your picture and you can apply a vignette filter to it. And what that does is it darkens the corners of your photograph. You can see it in the reference photo. So what it does is it darkens those corners, and you can really see it in the sky. In the bottom, you can't see it as much because it was already dark. And I wanted to apply that idea to my painting, but accentuate it just a little bit. So in the sky, you can see kind of this like arch-shaped glow, or like the rainbow-shaped glow to the sky. And I wanted to mirror that in the field even more than what you see in my reference photo. And so I made the field glow a little bit more than what you see in the reference photo, and I even accentuated it down towards the middle of the painting so that it would mirror what you see in the sky and create kind of that vignette feeling where it's darker in the corners and it really puts a spotlight or a focus in the center of the painting. I don't know if this is something I would do for like a big finished piece for my wall, but it was really fun to play around in my sketchbook. And that's what's fun with sketchbooks, is trying new things, kind of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and experimenting and learning. I tend to have two types of sketchbooks. I have my ugly sketchbooks where they're really rough, they're unfinished thumbnail sketches, they're not very pretty. And then I have these nicer sketchbooks that I pull out when I want to draw, but I don't want to commit to a big piece. And I don't want to find areas to store small paintings. Sometimes smaller paintings can be obnoxious to find storage for. So for me, it's easier to keep them all in a sketchbook like this. And I tried adding more highlighted wheat in the center, so I used almost like a pure white for them. But I just didn't like the way it looked. So I went back to kind of more of that curved shape that I had going and covered them up. I really had a fun time with this piece, but where I was struggling was trying to create kind of these glowing ray effects in my picture without blending tools to aid me. My pastel pencils can only go so far. I could have sharpened them a little bit more to a point and had a wider edge to work with, but I also didn't want to cover up everything I did, so I just kind of opted for this little bit of a hazy effect where I went back and forth kind of at an angle, and then I'm just going in and reinforcing a few highlights and shadows along the way. I'm still not sure how I felt about that part at the end, but again, this was an experiment. This piece was designed to push me outside my comfort zone, try new things, and grow as an artist. And this is your sign to do that. Put some kind of weird limitation on yourself where you can only use certain colors, you can only use a certain brand that you have, you can't use blending tools, or you can, when you're painting with watercolor, you can only use one type of paintbrush and it's different than what you normally use. Because those kinds of limitations that we put on ourselves really force us to grow and learn how to use our supplies in more efficient and better ways. And they make us better artists in the end. Is this my favorite painting I've ever created? Nope. But I do like a lot of things about it. I feel like it's one of the more interesting paintings I've done in a while, and it really helped me grow. And as I was looking at this picture and analyzing what I liked about it, I really liked the feeling of light and this like glowing feeling that you get, especially when you look at this picture from a distance. You really just feel like this light is radiating out of the center of the picture. And I really, really liked that effect. The other thing is I really liked the texture created from not over blending and how you can see those little speckles of pink throughout the sky and the rest of the piece. I really think it creates a feeling of harmony, having that pink kind of go through the whole piece. And that interesting texture just makes it feel a little bit more painterly and not so controlled. I feel like what happens with me when I'm painting as an artist is if I get stuck or I don't know what to do, I just blend, and I don't really think about it. And I think going forward, I'm going to try and be a little bit more intentional with when I'm blending and how I'm blending it. So here's the finished piece. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please hit the like button. If you have any questions about it or about pastels in general, leave them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you want to see more of what I create here on the channel, please hit the follow button. Have a great day and I will see you next time. Bye.